Welcome to the Craftsman Founder Podcast, hosted by Lucas Carlson. Every week, we talk to founders, entrepreneurs, and those who've made a craft out of creating companies and enterprises. Listen every week to get ideas for starting, promoting, and growing your business. There are no shortcuts, just good old-fashioned hard work and craft. So sit back, relax, and enjoy this week's interview.
Hello, this is Lucas Carlson.
And hi, I'm Elliot Pepper.
This is the Craftsman Founder Podcast, and we're doing things a little bit differently from now on. We're going to do these introduction pieces where we kind of talk about things that are top of mind, catching our interest in the moment, and introduce our guests and the wonderful conversations. This week, we are continuing a discussion with Espree Devora that we started last week. So really, I don't think that there's too much. You could listen to this podcast and not listen to the other one, or you can start with the other one. It doesn't really matter the order. But this one goes deep. I'm really excited about this one because in this half of the discussion, we really deal with something that's very near and dear to my heart, is how do you deal with the fear of starting a company, and how do you get over that? How do you get over the fear of asking people for money? And we get really personal. We really try to understand this problem and try to come up with some solutions. It's never going to be perfect, but it's just an awesome, inspiring conversation. And Elliot, what did you think of this week's episode?
You know, I found it really moving, actually. And I think for anyone who's an entrepreneur or an artist or anyone really sort of forging their own destiny, right? Or hell, I mean, if you're about to stand up and give a presentation, like, fear is something we all have to work through. It's not something that, like, when you see Tony Robbins, I'm guessing he's terrified before every presentation he gives, even though he gives those presentations for a living. And one of the things I found so humbling and interesting about the conversation with Espree is how honest she is about those fears, because all of us have that tendency to roll up just like a little roly-poly bug, right? And try to put on this facade of being, you know, a gladiator, a gladiator of life, and this facade of perfection. And one of the things that I find the most compelling in any story, whether it's a pitch from an entrepreneur, whether it's a novel, whether it's a movie, whether it's a podcast, is vulnerability. Because vulnerability really invites your listeners or your readers or your audience or whoever you're speaking to into your own mind, into your own soul. And I think that's where things start to get interesting.
Yeah, that's so true. It's interesting you bring up Tony Robbins, because I read somewhere that one of his techniques for doing any presentation where he stands up in front of a group of people is that he always he actually jumps. He literally jumps around and pumps himself up physically and emotionally. He has mantras, and he's like, I can just imagine this giant dude jumping up and down backstage for 5 minutes, really getting his blood pumping, and it shows. Obviously, anytime you hear him, his energy is just so full of energy, and it's just it's when you hear that he jumps around for 5 minutes beforehand, it makes so much sense, because you can hear it in his voice, so much passion. And I'm a huge fan of Tony Robbins. I know that not everybody is, but he's come out with he's coming out with a new book that I just cannot wait for. It comes out in end of November, I think. It's called Money. Can't remember what the subtitle is, but what he did is he went out and he interviewed the top money managers all around the world. The hedge fund managers, the John Bogles, the smartest money managers out there. He would go and he'd spend hours recording interviews, taking notes, learning from them, and basically saying, what are your secrets? Tell me your secrets, and let me, what can the common person do? Because the financial system's not set up to help common people. The financial system is set up to sell things. It's all marketing. The fees, most mutual funds have high fees, but something like 90 or 95% of them never beat the overall stock market, and so it's better to just invest in indexes. But then if you invest purely in indexes, then you're subject to all the volatility. So like, what is somebody to do in this world where it seems like the whole deck is stacked against you, is kind of the question Tony Robbins set out to answer. And he actually did a series of 2 interviews on the Tim Ferriss podcast that are just spectacular, just really incredible interviews. And he goes into this a little bit in the podcast, gives you a taste of what's in the book. And I'm just so excited about that book. I cannot wait to read it. And
when's it coming out?
It comes out this month. You can pre-order it on Amazon. And possibly by the time this podcast is out, it might be available. But the podcast is up on the Tim Ferriss Show podcast already, and totally worth checking out. And it's really interesting because it talks about kind of how, in order to what the biggest secret that all of these investment people have is never lose money. It's kind of like the big mantra is rule number 1, never lose money, and rule number 2, look at rule number 1, and that's it's kind of everybody's golden rule is don't lose money. And how do you not lose money? He talks about the idea, the concept that your investments, you should be diversified. And diversified doesn't mean invest in 20 different stocks. It means different kinds of asset classes. So some stocks, some bonds, but even things that don't go along with those kinds of things. So like if one example right now is gold. Like right now, gold prices are crashing, they're going down, but the stock market's going up. That's an example where they're not connected. And usually when the stock market crashes, gold goes way up because people are all scared. And so that's, being able to balance your investments so that when one's doing poorly, another's doing great is a way to manage that risk. And that way, kind of, no matter what's happening in the market, you can guarantee that some of your investments are outperforming. And anyhow, the reason I bring this up, it continues the last conversation we had kind of about investment strategies. We talked about modern portfolio theory and barbell portfolio theory, where most of it's in very, very stable money market accounts, and some of it's in highly risky investments. One thing that has been interesting to me is taking kind of a hybrid approach, where instead of having 80% in the money market and 20% in high risk, I've been wondering, what if 80% of, and I'm no money manager, I'm not a stock genius, it's just something I've been thinking about, is what if 80% was in stuff that was kind of the modern portfolio theory? Mm-hmm. For somebody like you and I that are going to work for another 20, 30, 40 years easily, we're not going to take the money out anytime soon. So it's like if we lose some money in a year and gain it back the next year, it's not a big deal. So the money market isn't quite necessary for somebody our age. But if we mixed and had 80% in a modern portfolio theory, balanced 80% stock, 20% bond, sort of index funded sort of balanced thing, and then 20%, that's only 80% of your investment, 20% in the highly risky, like, and so then what's highly risky? So hedge funds, I don't know if people like you and I can invest in hedge funds. Maybe we can, but I haven't heard of any that we can.
No.
But we can invest in stocks. That's something you can go on Angel List or WeFunder and invest in stocks, and you can do options, which can be very dangerous. But if you know what you're doing, that can be a leveraged an investment. To me, I think something that you and I, pretty much any entrepreneur kind of knows, is you can invest in yourself. Mm-hmm. I think that's a risky investment, but it's especially if it's on education, that's a long investment, right? And so if you allot some of that money and say, this is money I'm going to invest in myself. Yeah, I'm not investing in myself. I'm not putting it in a bank account and letting it sit there. I'm spending it on things that'll teach me. I'm spending it on books, on courses, on further education. I'm spending it on my business. I've allotted this much of what I've gotten in my business. I'm spending it on, I'm going to write a novel and see if I can market it. And I had Tucker Max on the show, and he talked about book in a box, where you can have him. You spend 4 hours interviewing with him, and he will, out of that 4 hours of interview, he'll write an entire book for you, and that can cost like $8,000 to $10,000. That could be part of your 20% investment. Is investing in yourself in those kinds of ways, and maybe the book will sell $10,000 worth back, and you'll get your profit back, or maybe it won't. But like, writing a book is so much more than, and you know this, writing a book is not always monetary in terms of the what you're selling of the book, but it can be a career changer. Have you had any experience with that?
I would say my whole life is an experience of that. Yeah, I mean, I think you've raised a lot of interesting points here. I mean, one is just that, especially if you're in the beginning of your career, but even if you're midway through or nearing the tail end of it, I mean, I think people really underinvest in themselves. And I think that although there are some traditional avenues for that, like getting a graduate degree or something like that, I don't find those the most compelling. To me, most of those are competed out. And you sort of see that, right? Like, now having a bachelor's degree is not a competitive advantage because nearly anyone competing for most jobs has one, and graduate degrees are moving in the same direction. But what I do think is really interesting is that people don't realize that, the benefit of investing in yourself is that you actually control whether, you at least have some control into whether it achieves success or not. So, we talked about investing in stocks. Like, I own Google stock. Do I personally, Elliot, have any control at all over whether Google stock goes up or down? Absolutely not. I have like zero impact on that, right? But if I start a side business where I'm making sculptures and selling them on Etsy, right, and I'm investing the money I would have invested in Google into that side business, it might fail and Google might tank too, right? But at least I have some level of actionable input into the success of that venture. And I tend to do that when I'm looking at startup, like you mentioned options being very risky, and they are. But I've worked for options, and I have options in some of the startups I advise. And I do that because I know that I can actually add value and help advance the ball for that company. And so that's how I'm de-risking it, right, by investing time. And that's absolutely true on the book front. I started writing my first novel when I was an entrepreneur in residence at a venture capital fund. And I did it for fun. I just thought it would be a good time. And what's been really interesting so far, the book came out last March. And what's been really interesting for me so far is, I'm not J.K. Rowling. We haven't sold millions of copies, and I don't have like huge royalty checks coming through the door. But I have had an unbelievable amount of non-financial benefits that I had never anticipated from the beginning. I've met tons. So the book, it takes place in a startup setting. It's a thriller novel about a startup company, and I have met dozens of leading startup CEOs purely because they read the book and enjoyed it, or because they were going to tell me some war stories to like maybe weave into a future book, right? And same with investors, same with all of these people who were in my industry and just through my job were essentially untouchable. But by investing in myself and by actually executing and launching a creative project, it opened so many doors I never thought about before. And I wouldn't have met you, and I wouldn't be on this show today if that hadn't happened.
Yeah, absolutely. I actually attribute the writing my first book, which was a technical book. It was the Ruby Cookbook. I think that the only reason I ever got funding for my company, AppFog, was because when I went to venture capitalists, I was the guy who wrote the book on Ruby. So I was a domain expert. And so writing a book, maybe it didn't ever make me rich and wealthy directly, but it led to being able to raise venture capital, which was so I could monetize books not by selling them, but by the reputation, the introductions to venture capitalists. It really does open doors, and so it's a really interesting and underused concept, I think. One of the things,
just to butt in really quickly, but I think one thing that's unique about our generation right now, Lucas, is that like the tools for doing those kinds of projects and for investing in yourself have become so much cheaper, right? Like the level of investment that you need to test for a positive outcome has just gone through the floor. Like I recently watched a TED Talk from J.J. Abrams, who he wrote American Lost and many other extremely successful shows.
Is it the Magic or the Mystery Box?
Oh yeah, the Mystery Box, right? And so it's first of all, great TED Talk. We should include a link to it. It's fantastic. But one of the things he talks about is, when he was a kid, watching movies, like what George Lucas was able to accomplish with Star Wars in terms of special effects and camera work and all this stuff, cost ungodly amounts of money in today's dollars, right? Like the amount of investment required to do that was crazy. And he points out that today you could do effects better than Star Wars with a desktop PC that a high school is throwing away, right? Like, you'd have to learn how to make it. Like, obviously there's a lot of art and craft and how to actually put that together and make it any good so that somebody would want to watch it. But the fact that those tools are there is really, I think, inspiring. And it's one of those things, I'm sure you've heard this too. Once you write a book, many people tell you, many of your friends come up and say that they've always dreamed of writing a book. And I think that's awesome. I mean, I think most people have books in them, right? But I feel like about 80% of my friends have mentioned that, right? Like, oh yeah. And like 20% of them, I guess, never have thought of writing a book. And to me, what I find so interesting is like that is the lowest barrier to entry of anything you could possibly imagine, right? Like you have a word processor, or you can buy a notebook and a pen for less than $5 total, right? And you already know how to write if you're literate, right? Like if you went to school, you know how to read and write. And I think that that's almost the simplest version, but there are analogs across the spectrum. You can teach yourself to program. You can teach yourself to be a woodworker. And the amount of sort of like condensed knowledge that's there on the internet for free that you can access anytime, and the number of tools that are out there that are mostly free is mind-blowing. I think there's never been a better time to invest in yourself.
I completely agree. So let's get into the interview with the continuation of the interview with Espree Devora. I'll give our listeners two resources if they want to continue, if they want to invest in themselves. Two things that they can do right now to do that. One is there's a great book by James Altucher called Choose Yourself, and it's all about this concept. It's a beautiful book. The second is if you're interested, if you've always wanted to write a book and are too busy, but you have some extra cash and you're interested in this book in a box idea from Tucker Max, go ahead, tell them that I sent you, Lucas Carlson. And they told me if you do that, you'll get a discount. So hopefully that'll help you out. And without further ado, I'm super excited about this podcast, and we'll check in with you next week.
One question that I had is sort of maybe you could share some of the lessons you've learned about storytelling. I think that one of the things about podcasting right now is that there's so many interesting new ones out there. You mentioned Alex Blumberg, and
right.
is awesome. Serial, which is made by his previous coworkers,
right.
Like This American Life is fantastic. Right. But I feel like many podcasts on iTunes people are still trying to figure out what the best way is.
Totally.
To leverage audio and to really tell powerful stories with it. Because you came from the action sports background, now
right.
you're experimenting in all these different mediums.
Right.
What are some of the lessons you've learned on the creative side?
So I think this comes back to, like, you remember when I was talking about, like, trying to be someone else and follow someone else's roadmap? I think a lot of people are trying to be someone else as a podcaster, and I continuously, literally all the time, I listen. I take podcasting very seriously, so I listen to as many different podcasts as I can regularly to see everybody's different style, but I remind myself to always be myself and not try to be them. I just kind of want to be inspired by what they're doing. I'm like, that's interesting, or, oh, hey, you could incorporate a sponsor this way or that way. But like you mentioned, Tim Ferriss has this amazing podcast, which I've heard. Now, I don't remember his first episode, so this is totally just like a hearsay story. But I heard his first couple episodes were terrible, right? And I would imagine that maybe his and from what I know of him, he's a perfectionist. So I could imagine that his first couple episodes were possibly terrible because he was trying to be a perfect podcaster. I don't know this. I haven't talked to him. Disclaimer, like, this is just my perception of the world. But I'm sure a lot of people go through that. Like, they're trying to be something perfect. I know this because in the past, like, I've struggled with, I want to be the perfect entrepreneur. And what I find so much more that causes me so much stress, by the way, because I'll find that I get caught up in that, oh my God, am I doing it right? Am I doing it right? Am I doing it right? And when I let go and just say, am I moving forward? Am I doing the best I can with what I have? Am I learning from it? Do I find my own podcast interesting? I listen to my own podcast again and again to learn from it and see what I think of it. And I listened to one of my episodes today, actually, and I was like, you know what? It was interesting. Stitcher has a strange sound quality, whereas iTunes is a little bit more robust. And I was like, I don't know why that is. Now I want to go learn that because I wasn't very comfortable with the audio quality of my podcast on Stitcher. I must be doing something wrong, right? So it's like that's a learning process. It evolves. But to listen to, Alex Bloomberg, who I think is one of the most amazing storytellers ever, or the new Serial podcast, which is like ridiculously good. Like I'm addicted to it. Like and to try to be them, either overnight or at all. Because maybe I'm not meant to be them at all, right? I have to find what's right for me. But if I do think that style of storytelling is what's right for me, to expect that I'm going to be that overnight when they've had 15 plus years to master be that, level of a storyteller, that's ridiculous. But what I do have experience in is I have experience in action sports and skateboarding videos. So I have experience in fast pacing. I have experience in creating a vibe. These are things that I bring to my type of storytelling now. But I will say that, again, I listen to mine over and over again to see, are they interesting? Do I find them boring? I like to upload my podcast episodes on SoundCloud, send them out to like a select group of people, say, what do you think? Do you think it sucks? Do you think it's great? What parts were boring? Was this EDM intro thing? Did it take away from the intimacy? That's something that's really concerning me right now. These are things that are really, if there's any takeaway I want you to have by the time we get off of this podcast, it's that trust yourself. Really just follow your own journey. Don't try to be someone else because that person already exists out there, but you're new. Like, you're something fresh and refreshing. But there's one particular topic, I'm not sure where our conversation is going right now, but I think it's really important, and it's important to me, and it's something, like, I like to really put myself out there, and it's something I'm struggling with right now, and I think it's something a lot of people struggle with, and I think it's something that you guys have a lot of experience with, and we could all empower people together. And that's this notion of, like, making money, making sales from your art, from your content, attracting sponsors. I've been reaching out to sponsors to get annual sponsorships. There's this whole debate in podcasting. Can you actually make money from podcasting? There's a great talk. Amanda Palmer, I think her name is, on TED. She did this whole talk. It ended with the question. Let's see. I hope I don't butcher it. The question is not to make people pay for money, but how do you? The question is not how to make people pay for music, it's how to let people pay for music. And I was like, whoa, like brain explosion. Yep. And I would love to address that because it's something I just create. Have you guys heard of Patreon?
Yeah.
Okay. So Patreon is this site that is to support content creators so that their fans or people that really admire their content can support them to create further content. I just created a Patreon page. It's not live yet. I've been struggling with this. This is why I watched Amanda's video, and I hope this is okay, and I know this kind of takes me off the expert stage, but this is real, right? Like, a lot of us, we're talking about fears, and I feel like, man, like, here I am, dedicating my life to helping people in the LA startup community, or I don't even like the word helping, to supporting, to being that bridge to resources, being something that I would have wanted, that I still want right now, right? And that doesn't like just come out of the sky. The way I'm doing this is like I've made I've set up my life in a certain way. I've reduced expenses. I'm like living on my savings, like stuff like that, to make sure that like everything can be taken care of and I can have the longest runway possible in order to build this thing that I really believe in, right? And so I was like, okay, there's a few ways that I could do this. I could do annual sponsors for like the year to come. I never reached out to sponsors in my life. I could get advertising, which is where like people pay per listens, but I'm like, how am I going to get paid per listens when I'm a new podcast, right? Or it's like, how does a startup get customers when they have never existed before, like, or I could do this like crowdfunding, a Kickstarter, an Indiegogo, or Patreon. But then the thing comes up is like, value. What if I'm not good enough? What if my product's not ready enough? What if people see it as begging? What if, how do I attract people? How do I sell people? How do I create something that, there's all these different questions, and I think this is a real issue, and I think it's really important to kind of like address my own question. In the startup life with a web app or a mobile app, I found BetaList is the best way to attract. Have you guys heard of BetaList?
Yep.
BetaList is a site that features pre-launch startups. BetaList is amazing. When I featured my my previous startup on BetaList, I got over 500 leads, like 500 people interested in my company. Those are 500 people that would be interested in potentially purchasing from me. But that's a lot of people. That's 500 people. So it's like, and then how do you even start to address, like, okay, now you have 500 people. How do you approach the money? I mean, I think I'm going to kind of like give the table back to you guys to kind of lead, like let's address this. This is real.
Yes.
Even with me, with my Patreon, I'm like, I'm scared to press the launch button,
Well, it's super interesting that you mentioned these things for a few reasons, because there's actually two podcasts that I'm a huge fan of that also talk about this particular issue pretty recently. One is Joanna Penn, who's a New York Times bestselling author, who has a great podcast, and she was just on this podcast recently.
Right.
And she is going through the exact same questions you're going through from not necessarily like an entrepreneur's point of view, but she calls herself a author entrepreneur. And this whole idea of how can an author slash podcaster make a living. She's struggling with the exact Patreon. To her, it's very difficult for her to ask people to sponsor, and so she's going through the same struggles. But I think that TED Talk, which I'll link to in the show notes, is very, very important. The other thing that came to mind when you were talking was another fantastic entrepreneur podcast, which is Entrepreneur on Fire.
Yeah, I met him last week as well, John Lee Dumas.
Yeah, he's awesome. He's amazing. What he's done with podcasting is incredible. But then what's cool as well is that he has created a resource guide for podcasters about how much do you charge for advertising on your podcast, how much, like different ways to monetize, different ways to grow your audience with podcasts. And it's like all of these are just free resources that he's created for helping other podcasters set up their stuff, and it's really interesting to see kind of it's a groundswell of people who care about helping other people and creating great content, trying to figure out how to make a living off of that.
Totally. But let's like seriously address it. Like, let's make it so our conversation right now, somebody could get off this podcast and really feel I can do this and when. You know what I mean? It's kind of hard for me to vocalize. Like maybe Elliot, like what can someone who's in let's be super raw, right? I have We Are LA Tech, incredibly passionate about it. I'm exploring these different ways to sustain it, and right now I have this Patreon, and I'm afraid to click the launch button. So what would you tell me that would empower me, or am I valid to be afraid to click a launch button, you know?
Sure. No, I mean, that's a great question that I'm terrified to be asked, because I struggle with it every day. Yeah, no, I think it's fantastic. I mean, you know, I'm trying to see if there are any lessons that I can draw from being an author. And one of the things that really that I've noticed is that you don't want to feel like you're asking for money, and
right.
and people don't want to be asked for money.
Totally.
Right? I mean, that's not a fun thing. So
that's a great core, yeah.
Yeah. So like, you want to make sure that neither of those is the case. Like what people do want is people love to be included.
Yeah.
And they really, and if you can give them an invitation to somehow have like that kind of access, whether it's like we were talking about other podcasts, Serial actually does this well, right? Like and I don't even think they charge for it, but like on their website they have evidence from the crime that the whole story is investigating, right? And people who love the show really, really love to have that extra access.
Totally.
And you're going to have a lot of people who sort of love the show who don't care, right? But they're not going to be the people who volunteer to pay anyway. And so, you know, I don't know. I mean, like, I think about what you're doing with We Are LA Tech. I mean, like, could you do it in your living room? And like, could you have like people who really love the show like come and see it as a live event, almost like, you know, like TV talk shows used to be, right? Like salons.
Right.
I mean, I don't know, right? Like that could actually be like an event that you could sell tickets to, even though it's a podcast, right? And like that could make it really dynamic and interesting. I mean, I'm just going off the cuff here. I have no idea.
But remember, the core question is not, because there's tons of activities, and we're all, obviously there's 3 creative people on this call right now. But the core question is, like, how do we get past the fear? Like, let's say we had a thing in my living room, sure. But then you have to, one, have a ticket page. Let's say we use Eventbrite, right? Mm-hmm. And then you have to put a price on that, and then you have to send it to someone you probably know and say, you have to pay $10 to come. That's really, that's really tough for a lot of people, because, and then someone's going to say, oh, can I get in for free? Or how, let's address that, you guys. This is a very real challenge, and it's just, I just think it's really important for all of us. Yeah. I mean, Lucas, absolutely. you raised like a ridiculous amount of money. Yep. When you first were going out there, like, did you have any like mental blocks of whether even you were worthy of that money?
Oh yeah, every day. Yeah, every day I woke up scared. Every day I had an internal track in my head that told me that this was a stupid idea, that I needed to stop trying, that it told me that, and this is the truth, I was 3 months away from my son being born when I quit my job, and I had no health insurance and no income, and my wife didn't work when my son was born, and I didn't have, and I tried to fundraise through that process. I didn't get money as quickly as I hoped, and it was 3 months after he was born that I finally raised enough money to start paying myself any salary at all, and that was the most terrifying portion of my life. And that moment was also the most rewarding moment of my life as well, because it taught me that the things that my head tells me, the thoughts that are going through my head, are things that you don't have, like, people think that that's you thinking, but you don't actually have to go with what you're thinking. You can actually hear those things and decide. It's like when you're standing on a rock jumping into a pool of water, some pond or something. Right. It's like you could stand there forever and you could have 2 million reasons why it's a terrible idea to jump in. It might be too cold, you might not swim, you don't know how deep it is or how shallow it might be. Like, you could just stand there and think about it. But at some point, and it's never a logical point, it's never a point where, oh, okay, now I have decided that it is the right time to jump in. It's always a point of giving up on that soundtrack and doing it anyhow. And like you said at the beginning, It's like at some point you have to trust yourself and just go for it. And you realize that the stories you tell yourself are the same things that limit your own action. Things that go on in your head are just stories. That when you realize that that's a soundtrack, when the thoughts, the fears of what are people going to say, what if people, it's just a soundtrack that's playing. When you realize that that's actually not a call to action, but a recording on repeat, and what you do is you close your eyes, you plug your nose, and you jump in. You don't think about... You
take steps forward.
Yeah, you don't... Yeah. You're never going... And the reason you're never going to convince yourself that it's a good idea to ask for money or to charge for your product or your ticket for your event is because, like, the truth of the matter, the logic of the matter is it's probably not a good idea. Rationally, it's probably a terrible idea to ask for money, and you're probably absolutely right that you shouldn't. And you still have to do it anyway. And like, you're never going to convince yourself. If you sit around waiting to convince yourself that it's a good idea to start charging for your podcast, that day is never going to happen, and you're never going to convince yourself. It's always going to, you'll never know. You'll never know what is going to, and what I like to tell entrepreneurs who are in this kind of crux point where they're just terrified and petrified of what if, I like to tell them, like, a lot of product entrepreneurs, they love A/B testing their product. But they've never thought of A/B testing their life.
That's awesome.
And who knows? Like, instead of saying up front that you know what'll happen if you start charging, A/B test it and see what happens.
Totally. One thing that I that I remembered, a couple things actually, was Save Business Time, my blog, when it was more of a site than a blog, whatever that means. Anyway, I contacted on the phone 100 people and asked them all these different payment models. And I was so surprised. The biggest takeaway from those calls were the majority did not want it for free, because having something for free meant the person creating it didn't care and wouldn't invest their time in it. They wanted to pay, and that blew me away. And now, what helps me get through, the reason why I will click that launch button, even though I'm terrified to click it. The reason why I will is because I'm simply sharing my story as I go on. I'm actually probably at some point today going to post that page, or maybe tomorrow, to my Facebook to share with my friends. This is scaring the shit out of me. What do you guys think of this page, right? And like, get that kind of feedback, because what is the worst that can happen? And I think that concept, like, what is the worst that can happen? Like, you're listening right now to the three of us talking. What's the worst that can happen if no one purchased your thing? It can either mean one of two things. One, your thing's not good enough, or you just didn't position your thing correctly. Like the Coolest Cooler on Kickstarter, definitely Google it if you haven't seen it. The first time they went out and did the Coolest Cooler on Kickstarter, I think they didn't get funded, but they did get like $100,000 or something. It was a nice amount of money, but they didn't get funded. The second time they did it, they learned from that first time. They're the highest Kickstarter they've made, like over $1 million or something. So how did the exact same product, they didn't change the product whatsoever, how did the exact same product go from not being funded to being the highest funded Kickstarter? It had to do with they were marketing it it's a cooler, and they were marketing in the wintertime instead of the summertime. It had to do with their outreach. It had to do with how they were positioning. Read the blog post on it. That's what I've been doing, how they were positioning their cooler, like in the Kickstarter, whether they focused on the cooler first or how someone uses it first, like meaning the technical portion versus the usage. Like, there were so many different things. So let's say I click not launch and not one person decides to be a patron. I learn from that. Either I'm positioned wrong, either I have the wrong video, or maybe that's not the right. Let's say, like, for me, there's 3 types of ways that one, I already know I don't want clients and I don't want to make money off of, like, the community. I just want to be supportive of the community. That means We Are Light Tech needs to be funded in an alternate way, right? So I have 3 choices. One is a job board that I created for LA startups that potentially companies will post on the job board. Second is annual sponsorships. And third for me is, fan contributions. And, like, I'm going to split test them and see which one works. And maybe none will work and maybe some will work. But as I'm going every step of the way, I continuously take steps forward. And what's most important is I truly believe in and love. I mean, look, I got these T-shirts made.
They're very cool.
Oh, thanks, man. Fiverr did the design. But I got these T-shirts. I'm proud of what I'm doing. So whether it, like, works or doesn't work doesn't deem whether it's successful or not. What's successful is how many people I positively impact and that I absolutely love and believe in what I'm doing. And then everything else is just a question of positioning and what's the right fit, and how long you could last to figure that out. But yeah, fear and money is a really intimate, important subject, and I think it holds a lot of us back. I love, how Amanda Palmer, I think her name's Amanda Palmer, ended her talk with, how do you let people be supportive of you rather than how do you make people? It's something I've said a lot. Like, people will say, when they're building a product, they'll say, I need to convince people. I'm like, well, if you have to convince them, then it's not worth anything, because, like, a real solid product, a person's been seeking forever and they're, like, thankful it exists. Like, for me, that was Shoebox. No one had to convince me to sign up for Shoebox. I was jumping for joy when I found Shoebox. It's like a Netflix for business cards and receipts. It's like when you create a product that you hit a pain point for enough people, the purchases will just happen. And so I think that's important. If you're listening, I hope this helps, like, a little bit. Like, if you have questions, definitely feel free to share your story with me, or I'm sure, Lucas and Elliot will be happy to be supportive too. Lucas has, like, the most amazing stuff on his podcast. He really, like, has candid conversations with these awesome guests. So listening to this podcast will help. Yeah.
A lot of them are my mentors. They're the people that actually help me get through the fear and the growth. And, like, before I started fundraising, I was a programmer. I had no idea how to fundraise. These are the people that helped me learn how to fundraise. These are the people that actually gave me money. Elliot and I are about to talk to one of my venture capitalists. It's like, these are the people that impacted my life, and I've felt so much gratitude being an entrepreneur and receiving their help that I wanted to see if I could give some of it back.
Totally. And you guys, I know we brought up the term podcasting a few times when we were talking, but this doesn't just apply to podcasting. This is just being an entrepreneur. It's scary. And it's scary, period. There's no way around that. And maybe there's a handful of people that aren't scared, but I'm sure that's not you listening, and it's definitely not me, and it's definitely not Lucas or Elliot. Like, it's scary. It's just scary, and we just have to go, and it's like being an entrepreneur, we have no choice, because it's this magical thing. Like, it's the reason why Lucas took these risks when he had his first child. Like, that's crazy. But it's this magical thing that happens inside our body that you just feel it. It's like this explosion, starburst of the soul that you just need to truck at this vision that you have. And it's not something that you go to a startup weekend or a hackathon and all of a sudden you're an entrepreneur. It's this feeling, and you can't. It's like you're addicted to it, and it's really beautiful. And that feeling leads to creating dreams for the people who work with you, making their dreams come to life. It means creating a positive impact on your global community. It means inspiring people not to let their fear hold them back, like this conversation right now. The only reason, like, Lucas and Elliot even do this podcast is because they feel passionate about being an entrepreneur, and they want to share that passion.
Yeah.
I've always felt that entrepreneurship is sort of an allergic reaction to doing everything else.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. My friend says that entrepreneurs are the only set of people who work 80 hours a week to avoid working 40 hours a week.
Nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's also interesting because I feel like all the fears you have about anything, like what in my experience, when I was scared to quit my job and start my company, all the fears I had that for reasons not to do it, after I actually did it, didn't turn out to be credible fears. They didn't turn out to be the things that I should have worried about. There were plenty of things that I needed to worry about after I did it, but it wasn't not one of the things that I thought I should that were the real fears were the real fears.
Totally. Oh, and just to be really clear, I think I have to become better at explaining like what We Are LA Tech is. We Are LA Tech is three things. It's a podcast. It's a calendar of all LA startup events. The podcast is focused on LA startups, and it's the first and at this point only podcast focused on LA startups. And it's a job board focused exclusively on LA startups, either to hire talent and also to find a job in LA startups. So it's those three things. And what it means by being a bridge is it means you could connect with us via Twitter. What us means, I have this amazing teammate like Carl right now is working his ass off to make things happen. So there's Carl and there's Rachel and there's I'm so grateful for my team. And they're in LA. They are in LA. You reach out via Twitter, or you reach out via the email, or you reach out via the website. It doesn't really matter how you reach out. There's a Facebook group that posts events and jobs. It doesn't matter how you reach out. You just say, hey, this is what I need. This is what's up. I need, and then we support you. Like, it's as simple as that. And that's really, I always pictured this, right? As an entrepreneur, you land into a city, in this case, LA. And where do you go? Do you go to a co-working space? No, you don't know which one to go to. Do you go to an investor? No. How are you going to get the meeting? How do you even know what investors exist? Who do you go to when you land in LAX to become immersed in the LA startup industry? You have no one. When you're a tourist, you go to the tourist office. I think, what is it, powered by the city or the government or whoever. But you don't, as a startup, and there's so many startup cities now, you don't have someone. So that's my vision, is that We Are LA Tech is essentially the tourist office for startups. And then I'm hoping, as a future vision, that I could create the same We Are LA Tech in all the cities. So Austin has one, DC has one, New York has one, Ghent in Belgium has one, Eindhoven has one in the Netherlands. And I would love to have this tourist office for startups in all the startup hubs. That's super cool. Where can people find out more about you? Tweet me at Espree Devora, ESPREEDEV, like Victor ORA. Or if it's a general question, if it's more really specific to LA startups, definitely tweet We Are LA Tech, WEARELATECH. And the website is wearelatech.com. The podcast is also We Are LA Tech without spaces. And yeah. How about on Facebook? I don't really I put photos on the Facebook page. I don't really Facebook it up. I prefer Twitter. Oh, you had asked me earlier about my social interaction on Twitter, and I know we're probably rounding up the conversation. So for a really quick thing, I stay genuine and I stay authentic. I do use Buffer. I use Buffer because I don't want to send people 20,000 things in the same 30-second time span. But I look up everybody that writes me, and I genuinely want to know who they are. And I don't automate social media. I really everything I do. I see people as humans, not as numbers, and that applies to social media too. Awesome. Yeah. Well, this has been awesome. This has been incredible. I'm probably going to split this into 2 episodes because it's so much great information. But it's been awesome having you on. And Elliot, thank you for co-hosting.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm leaving this conversation inspired. So thank you so much.
Oh, that's so cool, man. Yay. I just feel really honored, man. Lucas, there's not a lot of people like you that exist, and I'm grateful that you share yourself and you're vulnerable with everyone to support them in their journey. There's really not a lot of you.
Thank you so much. Thanks for your time.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Craftsman Founder Podcast with Lucas Carlson. If you like what you just heard, we hope you'll pass along our web address, craftsmanfounder.com, to your friends and colleagues. Be sure to check out our archive section on our website for previous podcasts. This has been a Craftsman Founder production. Join us next time for another edition of the Craftsman Founder Podcast.